As always, we would just love to have you involved in the show. Our first commentary match, not our first commentary match, that's Bournemouth-Chelsea. At 4:30, though, we're bringing you full commentary of Everton versus Arsenal, which will be a really interesting afternoon at Goodison. The first match since their owner, Farhad Moshiri, agreed to sell his 94% stake of the club to the American investors 777 Partners. Manager Sean Dyche, of course, was at Burnley when they were taken over, so here he is on what he thinks will change for him and his players.
Well, there's no impact on me at the moment or the players other than the news, obviously. Of course, as manager, I was aware of something may be happening. I know there's also ongoing checks from the Premier League and the like, so, that will take some time. I'm sure in due course I will speak to whoever need to, but at this stage it's too early for all that.
Are there concerns that it can impact your position at the football club?
Well, it's more about the modelling of the club. The Burnley situation was different. They changed the modelling of the club and their view of how they wanted it to go. So that wasn't really the case. I made it clear afterwards we didn't win enough games, simple as that. So I don't think that was anything to do with the people involved. That's just a fact of the matter of being in management. Obviously, we need to win more games at the current stage of this season, although we've been playing well. But yeah, so all them things are to be looked at. The characters involved, should this deal go all the way through? And then we'll find out more, relationships, how you build relationships and their view of how the club can move forward, both on the pitch and off the pitch. It'll be interesting to see, because the club have kind of found its way through all the different ways of working. More latterly, it's been me and Kev really have been, hands-on all the time, obviously, mainly in the markets and stuff like that. Not the bigger picture, not the stadium and all stuff like that, quite obviously. I don't know, it'll be interesting to see what their view of it is, how they see it moving forwards. And like I say, both on and off the pitch, the business side of the club, obviously the stadium as well, and then also on the pitch. So they're things to be looked at when let's imagine, when everything's done and signed and sealed and tied up.
Played 4 games, no wins, 1 draw, 3 defeats for Everton at the start of this season. I think, Nidham, lots of people have talked about them not having necessarily learned a lot of lessons from last year. Is this something that they just need to get done now?
As in the takeover, you mean? Wow.
Just to change the scenery, change the mood, change the atmosphere.
Well, to be honest, I thought it was, all positive. But when I was doing my research into it, there were some people who were unhappy with the potential for the new ownership group coming in as well. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't necessarily fix all problems as such. And the stuff on the field is clearly quite a big issue as well. I think when they lost their first 3 games, that's the first time they've done that since 91, I think it was. So that's an historically bad start for them, even though we'd seen them be down there at certain points in the past. But yeah, I don't know. A takeover could be great, but it might be much of the same. And one thing that I think gets forgotten about is it feels like the security for the fans maybe. But if you're inside that setup already and somebody new comes in, you don't know how they operate, would you feel secure in any of your jobs within that space? Because say even for like Sean Dyche, he's been part of bigger strategic things and so on. But does a new owner not want to have their own person in play? Do they not want to see maybe a certain style of football? Maybe they'll believe that they can change everything, get them playing in a different style. So yeah, I don't know.
I think a takeover is going to be a bit more long term, isn't it? If you're looking for a short term, the second they take over and they're going to win 5 games in a row, I think that's very unlikely if supporters are looking at that. The only really change you can do yourself to change the mood is to win. It sounds really, really basic, but you just read up the scores. They haven't kept a clean sheet again this season, which is, I keep going on about, probably mentioned it more than once today, but it's such a big thing for a team to do well. The second you concede, it's difficult. But yeah, there's someone need to get a win under their belt, and that, from my experience, normally changes the attitude and the positivity in the club. And then what would be, like Sean, I thought he spoke really well. There was what would be. There's so many steps there to go before 777 can take over or will take over or might not take over. So he's just parked it to one side and focusing on today, really.
It's a difficult position to be in, isn't it, really? I mean, he'll be involved, obviously, in some of the discussions and things that are going on, from Moshiri's standpoint. But, I really appreciated the what he said about, he's like, obviously I'm not involved in building the stadium, and I was just trying to think, I
think he'd do a great job.
What would a Sean Dyche stadium actually look like? I don't really know.
I'm pretty sure I interviewed him a few years ago, and I'm sure he told me that he's like a solid plumber.
So at least that would work.
I'm confident he would do a really good job.
Someone needs to Google that.
He's like a foreman role. I think he'd smash it.
Yeah.
Right, let's get a bit more from the Liverpool Echoes. Joe Thomas has joined us. Good afternoon, Joe.
Good afternoon. Thanks very much for having me on.
No, absolute pleasure. I mean, there's a lot to get into this, and we're going to bring an Everton fan into the discussion shortly as well. Firstly, I've even seen a couple of reports this morning that the takeover might still not go through. So, I mean, can you ease any worries for Everton fans?
I'm not sure where the worries lie. I think Naden just summed up the situation, the conflict that's going on in a lot of Everton fans' heads really well just then. I mean, we're in a period of uncertainty now, and we will be probably for quite some months. Like you said earlier, Fahad Moshiri's agreed to sell his 94.1% shareholding to 777. But that's only one step of the deal, because now what has to happen is that deal has to go through regulatory approval, which means it's going through checks and balances, basically from the Premier League and also from the Financial Conduct Authority as well. So they will be looking at a whole host of things, both from the background reputations of 777, the people who are involved, and their business's interests elsewhere, and how they've got on with their own regulators, and then also their finances as well. So there's a long way to go yet, albeit both 777 and people within Everton are confident that not only that a deal will be able to get done, but it will be done before Christmas. Yeah,
I think it's a real fascinating situation. And I think, I mean, I was a little bit flippant there about the Sean Dyche comment, but it is, in a very obviously serious situation to start having to consider, especially at this point in the season. But, I think it's important to consider, who is going to be benefiting the most. Is it going to be the club? Is it going to be the new ownership group? I can imagine that a lot of Everton fans are obviously keen to get rid of Moshiri, but is this going to be the right partnership? Is this going to be the right decision? Because, what is kind of this organization's primary objective? Is it to, develop a commercial infrastructure for the entire group, or is it just kind of to try and be profitable and kind of, it's a real complex one, I think.
Yeah, and that's a big part of it, Joe. It's not just about who's selling, it's about who's buying.
Absolutely, of course. I think if you were to speak to most Everton fans now, certainly with what's gone on and off the pitch over the past 2 years in particular, I think there'd be a general consensus that Moshiri's time at the club hasn't worked, and it probably would be a good thing for a fresh pair of hands at the top, really, to try and stabilise Everton and then push them forward. But obviously any new owner comes with anxiety and concern. I think that's particularly the case with 777, the prospective new owners, because albeit they are very, very new to the football market, in fairness to them. It's only really since about 2018 they started to invest in and acquire clubs. They own or invest in 7 different clubs around the world. But it's fair to say that their opening foray into football hasn't been a complete success. And whilst, and this would be the case with Everton, they have tended to target clubs that are in very difficult situations, often on and off the pitch, which would probably take some time to turn around. It's also probably fair to say that when you look at the performances on the pitch, which is obviously what most fans care about, with some of those other clubs, they haven't exactly sparked an immediate revival. And I think that's probably another concern when you bear in mind just how close Everton have come to relegation from the Premier League. Obviously, the final week 2 years ago under Frank Lampard, then the final minutes of the final game of the season last year under Sean Dyche. Everton isn't really a club that can afford to continue a decline, or, as we've seen with some of the other 7-7 clubs, perhaps take a step backwards before it can then potentially take steps forward.
We'll come back to this in a second, but there's been a goal at the Den. Aaron Paul.
Millwall nil, Leeds United 1. What if I told you, Steve, that this goal, the build-up began in the Leeds box because Millwall thought they should have had a penalty. Luke Ayling bringing Tom Bradshaw down. Bit of a tussle between the two. The ball just popped back into midfield. Millwall tried to build again, and then it was robbed by Leeds. And then the most sumptuous of counter-attacks down the middle. Somerville into Rutter, who fed it through to Peru in the area, and he just gently caressed the ball past Bartosz Białkowski. Millwall 0, Leeds 1. The natives are not happy about that one.
Let's bring in Blue Room podcaster, Everton fan Les Roberts. Afternoon, Les.
Afternoon, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, but just listening to Joe there, where are you emotionally at the minute with this situation of desperation for sale, but also desperation for the right buyer?
Yeah, I think that's my biggest concern, really. I think it looks like Farhad Moshiri just wants to get out now. He's thrown a lot of money at the club. It's not been successful because there's been no plan at how he's thrown that money at the club. It's just been like throwing good money after bad, sort of like chasing a loss really the whole time. So it looks like now he wants to get out, and that worries me because you think, how bad are the finances? And I think any deal is going to be good for him, not necessarily what's good for the club. And I think that's the biggest concern. I just want to pick up on Joe, actually, because I was listening to his Liverpool Echo podcast this morning. And the alarm bells really did start ringing when he was talking about 777's track record so far. so there's protest to Standard Liège and Vasco da Gama. That's two of their clubs. The crowdfunding, I think, for €5 million for Genoa's training ground. So if they're doing that, it kind of makes me wonder, well, if they got the money to put into Everton and see this sort of ground completion through. But I think Melbourne Victory was the one for me. The year before they invested, Melbourne Victory finished second. And then the first year they were there, they finished second bottom. So it's like, they seem to have this sort of reverse Midas touch at the minute, which is the last thing Everton need. Because we're not in a position where there could be any sort of drop off. When you've had like 2 relegation scraps in 2 years and it's looking like it could be a third, if someone comes in and it unsettles things even further, it could just be disastrous. So on the one hand, it would be nice to be positive because you kind of think, well, the club's been run that badly over the last 5 years and beyond. Surely they can't do any worse. But then you look at things like that and you think, well, things can always get worse, especially at Everton.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, actually, Les. In regards to that, do you think there's potential then for the current ownership to be better than what's to come?
I fail to see how, to be honest, because it really has been that bad. I think if the ground move wasn't going so well, and because that new ground is flying up, we pass it on the train on the way to Goodison, and we always say to each other, none of us can get excited about it because the state the club's in, we should be buzzing to see that flying up. And so you think it can't get any worse because I think the club has sort of got away with a lot of mismanagement because that ground move is going so well. So I do think it can't get any worse, but you've got to question the motives of a group like this coming in as well. They're not going to be some benevolent owner, who's in it for, just to make the fans happy. They're going to want some return on it. And you look at that ground and they think, if we can get that built, then the club is a much more saleable asset. And my big worry is that the club won't own the ground at this point. Because then that opens up a whole other set of problems. As you saw, I think the one I always go back to is Coventry with the Rico Arena, the way things sort of fell apart for them. Because they moved from Highfield Road into a ground that they then didn't own.
Derby County was another one, wasn't it?
Yeah, and you just think if something like that happens, that's how things can get worse, and that can snowball.
And in regards to stuff on the field then, say with this new ownership group, if they were to be good, what would you want them to be doing about, say, the team and, say, the manager? Is there consensus that Sean Dyche is doing a good job, or is it that maybe he's not the right guy for the spot?
It's a tough one, isn't it? I think last season to keep us up was nothing short of a miracle because for 90% of that season, I thought we were dead and buried, and I think a lot of fans did. So you can't fault him for what he's done there. This season, it started off okay. Our stats are pretty good. We've looked quite good, apart from the Villa game, I'd say. But we just couldn't score goals. Now we've kind of addressed that. We've got better when he's looked good in the 2 games he's played. So yeah, I don't think I'd like to see him. I don't think I'd like to see a new owner come in, get rid of Dyche, get their own man in, because we've done that. Oh God, too often. In fact, there's a funny stat about today's game. Arsenal haven't won at Goodison for 5 years, and every game Everton have had a new manager in every one of those games.
Everyone?
I didn't know that.
Everyone, yeah.
Wow.
So I think it was Koeman, Silva, Duncan Ferguson, Ancelotti, Benitez,
and Dyche.
And Dyche, yeah. So I think the only way we're going to win today is if we sack Sean Dyche.
Is this almost the worst time as a fan, Les, in that, and I remember being at St James's Park for the first game after the Newcastle takeover, and the whole atmosphere around the place was so different. Of course it was. If you're in a situation where you want a takeover, but there isn't one on the horizon, that is one feeling. But when you're this close and you have the opportunity to think about how things might change, is it almost the most difficult time?
Yeah, it's tough because we probably seem like really sort of ungrateful. Because, there's a lot of clubs who'd like to be in this position where they get rid of an owner and they've got someone new coming in. But I think we've just been battered so much over the past few years with everything. It's hard not to be cynical about stuff. So it's a really tough situation to be in. And then, as I said, you look at their track record. Some of the financing at Everton's been murky, to say the least, over the past few years. So it's a really weird situation to be in.
The other thing that we should say here, Joe, is, and Les was talking there about, benefactors. One of the things that Moshiri has said is, it almost feels like he's tried to get ahead of concerns about 777. He said the other day when the deal, if you like, was announced, the days of an owner and benefactor are out of reach for most. The biggest clubs are now typically owned by well-resourced private equity firms, specialist investors, or state-backed companies and funds. Do you think he was sort of trying to get ahead of the criticism there?
I think so. I think so, and I think he does have a point when you look around the football, around the Premier League and the Championship and top leagues elsewhere in the world. You do see the kind of increased proliferation of that multi-club model. But obviously there are there are success stories such as, say, Manchester City, but then there are also really complicated stories as well where things haven't worked out as well as you'd hope so, and I think that's probably where some of the trepidation lies in for someone like Everton, because I think the Citigroup model works so well for City because I think they are very much front and centre of that portfolio. With Everton, it's unclear. 777 have always been quite clear in their when they take over so far that they see their group of football teams as equals. So is this going to be something where Everton are seen as on the parallel as Genoa, as Standard Liège, as Melbourne Victory and things like that? Or is everything else going to be engineered to give Everton the best possible chance of success and making progress? And that is quite a significant concern and question that I think 777 probably need to answer. And I think there are so many concerns around them. And when you look at the reporting around 777, the stories that are out there so far, the picture is overwhelmingly negative. And it's one that is only going to lead to fear and anxiety growing, I think, amongst the fan base over the coming months whilst everything goes on behind closed doors with the regulatory process. And one of the things that I think would be useful, would be for 777 to rather than leave a vacuum of information over how these things are going to be funded and what their plan is for Everton, would be to come out and have a degree of engagement with supporters, or try and explain precisely what it is that they're hoping to do, offer some insight. They finished their statement on Friday by saying that they were not going to do that out of respect for the regulatory process, but really Everton's fan base is the best thing about the club, and it's been crucial to the club staying in the Premier League for the last 2 seasons. And I think really if 777 want to get ahead of the game on this, it would be useful for them to come out to some degree and just explain what it is that they're hoping to do. And that might allay some of the fears that are currently existing, because, as I say, if you're an Everton supporter or a journalist or you're anyone else and you're looking out there to try and do some research into 777, then it's a troubling background that you find. And there will be a wider context, and there will be positive points and things like that, but they need to be making that case for themselves.
Really interesting stuff, guys. Thank you very much indeed. Blue Room podcaster Les Roberts, and there we had Joe Thomas as well from the Liverpool Echo with us on 5 Live's Premier League Sunday, and we're bringing you Everton versus Arsenal in full at 4:30. Once we get to 1 o'clock, we'll bring you